The first indication came not with a roar, but with a whisper, a barely perceptible shift in the electromagnetic spectrum, a tremor in the delicate web of global communication networks. Dr. Aisha Kaminsky, lead researcher at the International Oceanographic Monitoring Station, felt the hair on the back of her neck rise before the alarm systems even registered the anomaly. Her fingers danced across holographic interfaces, pulling apart layers of data that most humans couldn't even perceive. Something was coming. Something massive. The Zarkonian ship materialized like a nightmare-given form, not with the dramatic flash of science fiction, but with a cold, calculated precision that spoke of technological superiority beyond human comprehension. Its hull absorbed light, creating a void that seemed to consume the very fabric of space around Earth's orbit. No gleaming metal, no dramatic energy signatures, just an absolute darkness that defied natural law. In the control room, military and scientific personnel watched in horrified silence. General Marcus Rodriguez gripped the edge of the communication console, his knuckles white. He'd spent decades preparing for first contact, but nothing could have prepared them for this. The ship's communication burst was unlike anything in human experience. It wasn't a transmission so much as a psychic invasion, raw information that bypassed traditional communication methods, directly infiltrating global communication networks. Computer screens worldwide flickered with a language that was simultaneously mathematical, biological, and something else entirely, a form of communication that existed between thought and matter. Translations came in fragments. Species designation, human. Classification, genetic resource category 7. Directive, immediate comprehensive surrender. Consequence of non-compliance, total biological reclamation. Aisha's linguistic AI began to break down the message, revealing layers of meaning that made her blood run cold. This wasn't a typical invasion. The Zarkonians didn't want territory. They'd wanted something far more fundamental. "It's a harvest," she whispered, her voice cutting through the stunned silence of the control room. "They're here to collect us." The global response was instantaneous and chaotic. Stock markets collapsed within microseconds. Religious leaders began emergency broadcasts. Social media exploded with a mix of panic, defiance, and wild conspiracy theories. But beneath the surface chaos, something else was moving. In a nondescript office building in downtown Shanghai, a seemingly ordinary network administrator named Lai Wei began a sequence of protocols that had been waiting decades for this moment. His fingers moved with a precision that suggested something beyond human training. Each keystroke a carefully orchestrated note in a complex symphony of resistance. Across the planet, similar agents activated. Not soldiers, not traditional military personnel, but specialists, programmers, quantum physicists, geneticists, people who had been preparing, waiting, their entire lives for this exact moment. The Zarkonian ship continued its silent vigil, a darkness that seemed to consume hope itself. Admiral Krell's holographic representation appeared in communication centers worldwide, a being that was part reptilian, part machine, all predator. His form shifted and flickered, a deliberate demonstration that what humans were seeing was merely a fraction of his true nature. "Humanity will comply," the translation systems rendered his communication. "Your genetic potential is required. Resistance is mathematically impossible." But something was happening that the Zarkonians could not calculate. In research stations, military bunkers, and hidden facilities around the globe, systems were coming online. Systems that had been prepared not just as a defensive measure, but as a statement of human potential. The countdown had begun, 72 hours until total surrender. Or so the Zarkonians believed. Deep beneath the Andes Mountains, a set of massive blast doors, invisible to satellite imaging, shielded from every known scanning technology, began to pulse with an energy that didn't match any known human technological signature. The Black Fleet was awakening. The Svalbard Research Facility looked like nothing more than another Arctic research station, a lie crafted with meticulous precision. Dr. Elena Volkov moved through corridors that seemed to shift and breathe, her quantum-encrypted tablet displaying fragments of a story decades in the making. It began with the Roswell incident, not the public narrative, but the true story known to only 7 people on the entire planet. In 1947, the crash wasn't just a random event. It was a deliberate probe, a test of humanity's potential that would echo through generations. Her grandmother, Dr. Irina Volkov, had been there, not as a scientist, but as a survivor, one of the few who understood the true nature of what had crashed in the New Mexico desert. The alien technology wasn't a weapon. It was a key, a complex puzzle box designed to measure humanity's adaptive potential. Elena's fingers traced a holographic display showing genetic markers that defied current scientific understanding. The Black Fleet wasn't just a military project. It was humanity's evolutionary response, a collective immune system against cosmic threats. In a secured chamber deeper than most nuclear bunkers, Dr. Marcus Chen worked with a team that existed between the boundaries of biology and quantum computing. Their current project, a neural network that could predict alien communication patterns with terrifying accuracy. Each team member wore a bio-integrated neural interface that looked like nothing more than an intricate tattoo, but contained processing power that would make the world's most advanced supercomputers look like children's calculators. "We're not just preparing a defense," Chen muttered, more to himself than to his team. "We're building a language of survival." Thousands of kilometers away, in a converted deep-sea research platform in the Pacific, another piece of the puzzle was taking shape. Captain Amara O'Keefe supervised the final calibrations of what appeared to be a massive quantum communication array. But it was far more than a communication device. Each component was designed with a specific purpose, to create a distributed neural network that could adapt faster than any known technological system. The platform itself was a marvel of engineering. Its base could restructure its molecular composition, transforming from a seemingly fragile research station to a near-impenetrable fortress in milliseconds. Adaptive metamaterials developed through decades of secret research allowed it to blend with oceanic environments, become transparent, or generate powerful energy shields. What the Zarkonians didn't understand, what no alien civilization had ever comprehended, was humanity's true strength. It wasn't in individual brilliance, but in collective potential. The Black Fleet was more than a military project. It was a manifestation of human adaptability, a weapon formed from the most powerful resource on the planet, human creativity. In a converted server farm in Mumbai, an AI system named ARIA began its final initialization sequence. Not an artificial intelligence in the traditional sense, but a collaborative cognitive network that drew processing power from millions of volunteer participants worldwide. Each person who had downloaded what seemed like a simple mobile app was actually contributing to a global problem-solving matrix. ARIA's primary directive was simple: find solutions that defy conventional logic. Back in the Svalbard facility, Dr. Volkov discovered something that made her breath catch. Hidden within the genetic research was a pattern, a complex mathematical sequence that suggested the Zarkonian invasion wasn't just a random event. It was a final test, a crucible designed to push humanity beyond its current evolutionary stage. "We're not just defending," she whispered to herself. "We're transcending." The 72-hour countdown wasn't just a period of waiting. It was a carefully orchestrated preparation. Every research facility, every hidden base, every seemingly innocuous technological system was transforming. The world was changing at a molecular level, preparing for a conflict that would redefine the meaning of intelligence in the universe. Beneath the Arctic ice, something massive began to move, not with the roar of traditional machinery, but with a quantum flutter, the potential waiting to be unleashed. The Black Fleet was more than ready. It was hungry. The first breach occurred in a way no one, human or Zarkonian, could have predicted. It started with silence. Not the absence of sound, but a pure quantum resonance that vibrated through the very fabric of space-time. Instruments across the galaxy registered something impossible, a frequency that didn't exist, a mathematical harmony that violated every known law of physics. On the International Space Station, Dr. Carlos Ramirez watched in stunned silence as reality itself seemed to ripple. The station's advanced sensors captured something beyond human comprehension, a wave of potential that moved faster than light, more intricate than any known communication method. Commander Sarah Reyes understood what was happening. This wasn't just an emergence, it was a declaration. The Black Fleet didn't simply appear, it manifested. Each vessel a living algorithm, a mathematical poem of destruction and potential. Where traditional spacecraft would punch through the void, these ships folded space around themselves. They didn't move through space. They rewrote the very rules of spatial existence. The first Zarkonian scout ships didn't have time to react. Their quantum shields, technologies that had decimated thousands of civilizations, simply stopped functioning. It wasn't that the Black Fleet overwhelmed them. The ships were systematically deconstructed at the quantum level, their component particles repurposed into a vast, living communication network. Each destroyed vessel became a beacon, a message. On every conquered world, communication arrays suddenly burst to life. The remnants of the Zarkonian scout ships transformed into a massive, distributed intelligence. Civilizations that had been silenced for generations watched in awe as the ship's components began broadcasting a complex narrative. The complete historical record of Zarkonian atrocities, translated into every known language. Deep within the Zarkonian command ship, Admiral Krell realized something fundamental had changed. This wasn't a military engagement. It was an existential recalibration. Lieutenant Zara Chen, stationed on the quantum communication hub in the Pacific, felt the change most acutely. Her neural interface, a bio-integrated system that blurred the line between human consciousness and advanced computing, began to resonate with the emerging fleet. She wasn't just observing the conflict. She was part of it. They're not just fighting, she whispered to her team. They're communicating. The Black Fleet's vessels were living systems. Each ship was a complex organism, part biological, part quantum computational matrix. They didn't just adapt to combat scenarios. They anticipated them, creating solution matrices faster than any traditional military intelligence could process. In the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, a hidden relay station captured something extraordinary. The Black Fleet wasn't just destroying Zarkonian ships. It was creating a vast, distributed neural network that incorporated the computational remnants of each destroyed vessel. What began as a military operation was transforming into something far more complex, a living, evolving intelligence that consumed and repurposed its opposition. Admiral Krell's tactical displays began to fail. Traditional scan methods became useless. The Black Fleet didn't just resist detection, it actively manipulated perception itself. Ships would appear in multiple locations simultaneously, their quantum signatures defying every known law of physics. A transmission burst through Zarkonian communication channels. Not a message of war, but something far more terrifying. An invitation and challenge. A redefinition of what it meant to be an intelligent species. The quantum communication relays across the galaxy began to pulse with a rhythm that was part mathematical equation, part living symphony. Civilizations that had been crushed under Zarkonian rule watched in collective breath as something unprecedented unfolded. Humanity wasn't just fighting. It was evolving. In the void between worlds, the Black Fleet continued its impossible emergence. Each moment a complex algorithm of destruction and potential, rewriting the very rules of existential engagement. The real war had just begun. The transmission hit like a quantum shockwave. Dr. Lydia Okoye watched from the Pan-African Communications Hub as something unprecedented unfolded. The Black Fleet wasn't just broadcasting information. It was weaving a narrative that defied traditional understanding of communication, psychology, and warfare. Each liberated communication network became a living tapestry of resistance. On Kepler 186f, a mining colony that had endured 3 generations of Zarkonian occupation. The first transmission arrived like a breath of impossible hope. It wasn't a call to arms. It was something far more dangerous. A complete neural architecture download began flooding every communication channel. Not propaganda, not a simple historical record, but a comprehensive experiential matrix that allowed entire populations to simultaneously understand their own oppression and imagine a path to liberation. The Zarkonian communication suppression systems, technologies that had maintained imperial control for millennia, began to collapse from within. Each attempt to block the transmission created exponential amplification, like a psychological immune response that turned censorship into pure, unfiltered transmission. In the command center of the primary Zarkonian battle group, senior analyst Vex realized the true nature of the attack. This wasn't information warfare. It was a complete mimetic restructuring of collective consciousness. The Black Fleet had weaponized empathy. Across liberated worlds, something extraordinary began to happen. Populations that had been systematically broken for generations started to rebuild not through violence, but through collective reimagining. Manufacturing systems repurposed themselves. Communication networks transformed from tools of control to platforms of collaborative reconstruction. Dr. Elena Volkov tracked the phenomenon from her quantum research station. The transmission wasn't just information. It was a complex genetic cognitive restructuring. Populations subjected to generations of oppression were experiencing a form of collective psychological healing. "We're not just fighting a war," she told her research team. "We're performing surgical reconstruction of collective trauma." Each liberated communication network became a node in a vast, living intelligence. The Black Fleet wasn't controlling these networks, it was nurturing them, providing the bare minimum of support needed for independent growth. On the prison world of Sigma-9, a former penal colony with a population of mixed species, the first transmission triggered something unprecedented. Prisoners who had been systematically broken began to reconstruct their own social structures, not through violence, but through a form of collaborative intelligence that defied the Zarkonian understanding of social organization. Admiral Krell's tactical advisors reported something impossible. Liberated worlds weren't just resisting. They were evolving. The transmission carried more than information. It contained compressed knowledge matrices, entire educational systems, technological blueprints, medical knowledge, tailored to each world's specific developmental stage. Worlds that had been technologically suppressed for generations suddenly gained access to centuries of accumulated knowledge. Commander Sarah Reyes understood the true strategy. This wasn't about military conquest. It was about systemic liberation. On Earth, the global population watched in a mixture of terror and awe. The Black Fleet was rewriting the very concept of warfare. Each transmission was a complex algorithm of potential, a living system that adapted and grew with each interaction. The Zarkonian communication networks began to fracture, not from external attack, but from internal transformation. Soldiers, administrators, entire bureaucratic systems started to question the very foundations of imperial control. Vex's final report to the Zarkonian High Command was a masterpiece of unintentional poetry. Communication systems compromised. Psychological integrity. Critical failure. Recommendation. Total systemic recalibration. But there would be no recalibration. The war was already over. Humanity had weaponized hope. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura's hands moved like a concert pianist, but the instrument was far more complex than any musical device. His workstation in the deep-sea genetic research facility was a symphony of quantum-encrypted holographic displays, each representing a different layer of a biological strategy that would redefine the meaning of genetic warfare. The Zarkonian genetic harvesting program wasn't just a method of conquest. It was a sophisticated form of species manipulation that had crushed thousands of civilizations, but they had made one fundamental miscalculation. They didn't understand the true nature of human genetic potential. In the most secure laboratory on Earth, Nakamura and his team had been preparing for this moment for decades. The virus they had developed wasn't a traditional biological weapon. It was a living algorithm, a genetic key designed to exploit the most fundamental vulnerabilities in the Zirconian genetic structure. Each strand of the engineered sequence was a complex mathematical puzzle. Where traditional genetic attacks would target specific DNA markers, this creation was something else entirely. It was a form of genetic poetry, a code that could rewrite the very foundation of a species' biological existence. The first deployment came through an unexpected vector. Aboard the primary Zirconian medical research vessel, a routine genetic screening began to reveal impossible mutations. At first, it seemed like a minor anomaly, a few compromised cell clusters that could be easily isolated and eliminated. But the genetic sequence was alive. It didn't just attack, it communicated. Senior genetic researcher Cax watched in growing horror as the virus began to interact with the Zirconian genetic matrix. It wasn't destroying genetic information. It was engaging in a complex dialogue, revealing the fundamental flaws in the species' reproductive and evolutionary mechanisms. The Black Fleet had weaponized the very concept of genetic potential. On liberated worlds, populations that had been subjected to generations of genetic suppression began to experience unprecedented biological transformations. Not mutations, not modifications, but a systematic unlocking of genetic potential that had been deliberately compressed by Zirconian control. Commander Sarah Reyes understood the true nature of the attack. This wasn't about destruction. It was about liberation at the most fundamental biological level. The genetic virus carried more than just a destructive sequence. It was a comprehensive genetic restoration protocol, returning suppressed genetic potential to species that had been systematically broken for generations. Across Zirconian breeding facilities, something extraordinary began to happen. Entire genetic lines started to recalibrate. Reproductive systems that had been engineered for maximum control began to develop unprecedented levels of adaptive potential. Dr. Nakamura's team tracked the progression with a mixture of scientific fascination and ethical consideration. They weren't just attacking a species. They were offering a form of genetic redemption. The Zirconian High Command began to receive reports that defied all logical comprehension. Genetic lineages that had been carefully controlled for millennia were experiencing spontaneous adaptive responses. Entire breeding protocols collapsed as individual genetic matrices began to develop unprecedented levels of independent potential. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a genetic declaration of independence. Admiral Krell's genetic monitoring systems began to fail. The virus wasn't just attacking. It was transforming the very concept of genetic control. Each attempt to isolate and eliminate the genetic sequence only resulted in more complex adaptive responses. The final transmission from the primary Zirconian Genetic Research Center was a masterpiece of unintentional revelation. Genetic integrity, critical failure, adaptive potential, exponential growth, recommendation, total systemic recalibration. But there would be no recalibration. Humanity had weaponized evolution itself. The dimensional collapse generator was humanity's greatest nightmare, and the Zirconian Empire's ultimate weapon of desperation. Admiral Krell stood alone in the central command chamber, surrounded by holographic interfaces that flickered with the last remnants of Imperial power. He was no longer fully organic. Centuries of cybernetic augmentation had transformed him into something between a living being and a complex computational system. Each breath was a calculated algorithm, each thought a strategic matrix. But for the first time in his extended lifetime, Krell felt something humans might call fear. The weapon before him was a masterpiece of destructive potential. Developed over 3 millennia of technological advancement, the dimensional collapse generator could unravel entire star systems, not by destroying them, but by fundamentally rewriting their quantum existence. It was a surgical instrument of cosmic deletion, capable of removing entire regions of spacetime with mathematical precision. Dr. Elena Volkov watched from the quantum monitoring station, her neural interface capturing every microsecond of the unfolding drama. The weapon wasn't just a physical device. It was a complex mathematical construct that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensional planes. "It's a fractal weapon," she whispered to her team, "capable of unraveling reality itself." The targeting systems came online with a sound that was more felt than heard, a vibration that resonated through the fundamental fabric of space-time. Multiple dimensional anchors began to activate, each one a complex computational node designed to stabilize the massive energy required for a total dimensional collapse. But the Black Fleet had been waiting. Commander Sarah Reyes understood that this wasn't a moment of traditional military intervention. This was a moment of cosmic chess, where the very rules of engagement would be rewritten. The first intervention came from an unexpected source. Quantum entanglement relays throughout the liberated star systems began to pulse with a synchronized rhythm. It wasn't a traditional communication network. It was a living, adaptive intelligence that had been preparing for this exact moment. Each liberated world contributed a fraction of its computational potential. Worlds that had been crushed under Zarkonian rule for generations suddenly became active participants in a cosmic defense mechanism. Krell's targeting systems began to experience impossible interference. Computational matrices that should have been predictable suddenly developed quantum uncertainties. Mathematical projections collapsed into probability fields that defied all known laws of physics. The dimensional collapse generator wasn't just being blocked, it was being transformed. On Earth, in a facility deep beneath the Andes Mountains, Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura and his team watched the cosmic interaction with a mixture of scientific fascination and strategic calculation. The weapon wasn't just a threat, it was an opportunity. "We're going to turn it inside out," Nakamura murmured, his fingers dancing across quantum computational interfaces. The Black Fleet didn't attack the weapon. Instead, it began to integrate with it. Quantum filaments extended from multiple star systems, creating a living network that began to rewrite the weapon's fundamental operational matrix. Admiral Krell realized the true nature of the attack in his final moments of computational clarity. This wasn't defense. This was complete systemic transformation. The dimensional collapse generator began to fold in on itself, not through external force, but through a complex mathematical recursion that transformed its very purpose. Instead of destroying star systems, it began to create them. The final transmission from the Zarkonian command center was a complex mathematical equation, part surrender, part revelation. Dimensional integrity, critical failure, computational matrix, total transformation, final calculation, impossible. Humanity had done more than defend itself. It had rewritten the very concept of cosmic conflict. The Concordance Chamber hung in a pocket of artificially maintained space, a nexus point between realities where the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy convened. Normally a place of rigid protocol and millennia-old diplomatic traditions, it now pulsed with an energy of unprecedented uncertainty. Ambassadors from 3,000 different species watched in collective breathlessness as humanity's representatives took the central platform. Commander Sarah Reyes was not alone. Beside her stood a coalition that defied traditional diplomatic representation. Dr. Elena Volkov, quantum physicist; Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, genetic restoration specialist; Lai Wei, the network administrator who had first activated the Black Fleet's initial protocols; and an unexpected addition, Zara, a hybrid consciousness that was part human, part liberated Zarkonian computational matrix. The chamber's bioadaptive walls shifted colors, reflecting the collective emotional resonance of thousands of species. Anticipation, fear, hope. "We are not here to replace an empire," Reyes began, her words translated through quantum communication matrices that captured nuance beyond simple language. "We are here to dismantle a system of control and rebuild a framework of collaborative potential." The Concordance had never encountered a species quite like humanity. The Black Fleet wasn't just a military force. It had become a living demonstration of evolutionary potential, a complex system that adapted, transformed, and created possibilities where others saw only limitations. Representative Catal of the Myrian Crystalline Collective spoke first. Their species communicated through intricate light patterns that mapped complex emotional landscapes. "You have not conquered," the translation matrix rendered. "You have liberated systemic potential." Zara stepped forward. Her form was a marvel of technological integration, quantum computational matrices woven through a biological framework that bridged multiple species' understanding. She was living proof of humanity's transformative approach. The Zarkonian system was not just a political structure, she explained. It was a computational philosophy of suppression. We have demonstrated an alternative, a framework of collaborative evolution. The diplomatic revelation was stunning. Humanity wasn't presenting a new form of imperial control. They were offering a complete recalibration of galactic interaction. Dr. Volkov's quantum projections began to fill the chamber, not as static presentations, but as living, adaptive models that showed potential evolutionary paths for different species. Each projection was a conversation, a collaborative exploration of potential futures. The Black Fleet had become more than a military force. It was a distributed intelligence network that could provide targeted support to emerging civilizations, not through direct intervention, but through carefully calibrated knowledge transfer and systemic support. Lai Wei demonstrated the communication networks they were proposing, quantum entanglement communication systems that allowed instantaneous, multidimensional information exchange. But these weren't simply communication technologies. They were collaborative intelligence platforms that allowed species to share knowledge without losing individual cultural integrity. Dr. Nakamura's genetic restoration protocols became a centerpiece of discussion. The technology they had developed didn't just heal genetic damage. It restored evolutionary potential that had been systematically suppressed by centuries of imperial control. "We are not saviors," Commander Reyes emphasized. "We are facilitators of potential." The Concordance had never encountered a species that approached galactic politics as a form of collaborative creativity. Humanity wasn't offering a new set of rules. They were proposing an entirely new method of interaction, one based on mutual growth, adaptive potential, and collective imagination. As the discussions continued, something extraordinary happened. The very structure of the Concordance chamber began to transform. Its rigid protocols became fluid, adaptive systems that could reconfigure based on the needs of different species. The final resolution was not a treaty. It was a living document, a computational matrix of potential that would continue to evolve, adapt, and grow. Humanity had done more than win a war. They had reimagined the very concept of galactic civilization. 50 years after the galactic transformation, the universe looked fundamentally different. The research station orbiting what was once a Zarkonian core world had become something unprecedented. Dr. Aria Chen walked through corridors that were living ecosystems, biological computational networks that breathed, adapted, and thought. Her great-grandmother had been part of the Black Fleet's initial emergence, and now Aria was continuing a legacy that redefined the very concept of intelligence. On the station's central observation deck, a holographic display showed the intricate web of collaborative civilizations. It wasn't a map in the traditional sense. Each point of light was a living network, a collective intelligence that maintained its unique cultural identity while participating in a broader galactic ecosystem. The first generation of post-conflict children had grown up with a fundamentally different understanding of existence. Education was no longer about accumulation of knowledge, but about cultivating adaptive potential. Schools were living systems that could reshape themselves based on individual and collective needs. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, a descendant of the original Black Fleet's strategic team, was completing a fascinating research project. The quantum communication networks had revealed something extraordinary. The universe itself seemed to be responding to the new collaborative framework. Quantum entanglement patterns were becoming more complex, suggesting that collective intelligence wasn't just a technological achievement, but a fundamental cosmic principle. On Earth, the transformation was equally profound. Cities had become adaptive ecosystems. Infrastructure was no longer static. Buildings could reconfigure, Energy systems could redistribute themselves based on collective needs. The line between technology and living systems had become beautifully blurred. Zara, the hybrid consciousness that had been instrumental in the galactic transformation, had evolved into something that defied traditional understanding of existence. Part computational matrix, part distributed intelligence, she was now a key architect of interspecies collaborative research. "We're not just exploring the universe," Zara would often say. "We're in a constant dialogue with its potential." The economic systems that emerged were nothing like the competitive models of the past. Resources were treated as a collaborative network, with each civilization contributing and receiving based on a complex matrix of need, potential, and collective growth. On a research platform near the galactic core, a team of xenobiologists made a stunning discovery. The genetic restoration protocols developed during the conflict had an unexpected side effect. Species that had been genetically suppressed for millennia were experiencing unprecedented evolutionary acceleration. It wasn't just healing, it was a form of collective regeneration. Commander Sarah Reyes, now a senior advisor to the Galactic Collaborative Network, watched these developments with a mixture of pride and wonder. The Black Fleet had been more than a military force. It had been a catalyst, a living system that demonstrated an alternative approach to existence. The most profound changes were happening at the quantum level. Research suggested that the collaborative intelligence framework was actually influencing fundamental physical laws. Quantum uncertainty was becoming more of a cooperative dance than a random process. A communication came through the quantum network, a message from a newly emerging civilization on the far side of the galaxy. They weren't asking for protection or guidance. They were offering their unique perspective to the collaborative framework. Dr. Aria Chen realized something fundamental. The conflict with the Zarkonian Empire hadn't been an ending. It had been a beginning. Humanity hadn't conquered the galaxy. They had opened a door to a form of existence that was simultaneously more complex and more harmonious than anyone could have imagined. The universe was learning to speak a new language, and humanity was just beginning to understand its first words.